I started getting homesick, I think, but it took a couple of years. But I was in Tucson, Arizona, settling a discrepancy we had over there, and it took darn near 2 weeks. And while I was there, I started thinking about Friday Harbor, and I knew one of my best friends was a man named Dick Frank, and he and his partner bought Brown Island that I played on as a child, and I knew they paid $34,000 for the island. And while we were living in West LA, I went out in the hills overlooking San Fernando Valley. There was a guy cutting up land and had a bulldozer, and he was cutting it up and cleaning it up and selling the sites. And it gave me the idea that maybe I'd call Dick Frank and see if any chance I could cut up Brown Island. Well, I called him. He said, if you're coming home, I want to help you. Just don't cost me any money, he said. And anyhow, I talked to Barbara about it, and I left on New Year's Eve in 1960, went to Seattle, got off the airplane in a rainstorm and windstorm, threw up my coat, and thank God I'm home at last. And I went down to the hotel and where my fraternity brothers were having a New Year's Eve party. And I stayed there for a while, and I slept till 4 o'clock in the morning, and then got up and caught the ferry, caught the bus to Anacortes, caught the ferry, and at 11 o'clock on New Year's of 1960, I was in Friday Harbor, home. And I don't know how to go about what happened, because there were so many lucky things that happened to me. When I started the insurance, but I took the insurance company back from a gal that was running it for me, and I found out we didn't have any insurance that was competitive, really, to the farm stuff that was going on, farm agencies exactly. And I heard about General Insurance Company in Seattle, which was out by the University of Washington, and I'd worked there, run an elevator once, and I knew the company very well, and I knew a lot of people that worked in it. As a matter of fact, one of my classmates in fraternity, his father was president of the General Insurance Company, and so it was unnatural for me to call them, and I found out they had a new company called Safeco, and I got to know those people, and so I called and asked if I could be an agent. And they sent 2 guys up here to see me, both of them fraternity brothers of all night. And one of them was the guy that pledged me to the fraternity house, and the other guy was a fellow named Bob Lawrence, who we called the Brain. He was quiet and very bright. His majors were economics and engineering, which was a great combination. And his father-in-law, and I knew him quite well too. Anyhow, they came up to see me and and examined things and said, "You're in. So you got to come down." And so 2 or 3 weeks later, I went down to be oriented to the insurance company and all the divisions of it. And while I was there, the guy that pledged me, who was a sales manager, he wasn't there. So Bob Lawrence took me to lunch at the fancy hotel across the road. And while we were there, I told him what I was trying to do, and he said, "Boy, I'd like to do that too."
With Brown Island, you were telling me about Brown Island.
Yeah, then I mentioned to him Brown Island. He said, "Mean the island out in the harbor?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, it's a pretty island." He said, "Why don't we get together on this thing," or something like that. He had developed a piece of land down by Tacoma, and a group of them, and they all ended up with lots and made money besides. Anyhow, that's how I started with Brown Island, and this is one of the things that happened to me was very important. There was a local man whose family was the Nash family, which was a big family on the island, business, and he happened to be the chairman of the board of the San Juan County Commissioners. And I went to him to mention Brown Island to him, what I wanted to do to it. And he said, well, I think that's a good opportunity, and let's try it. And so I got together with Bob Lawrence. Bob Lawrence formed his company called San Juan Associates, and I called mine called San Juan Properties. And we formed right alongside of each other. We had the same attorneys, the same accountants, the same the same advertising agency. And this guy was so smart that when we decided to do Brown Island, got into it heavily, it was the most exciting thing, anything that happened in Friday Harbor in real estate in years and years and years, maybe ever, because Brown Island became the first fully designed development in the county. Everything about it was designed. Who the market were going to do. Going to be boaters, part-time and full-time. And it was, all the lots were going to be all waterfront lots. The inside was all going to be park. And one end of the island, the north end of the island, it was all old growth trees, and there had to be 50 or 60 enormous old growth trees, 6, 8, 10 feet big. Anyhow, it was the design was something that was immensely important to me for the rest of my life.
Now, tell me a little bit about how you or how Brown Island came up with the design.
Because he hired designers.
Bob Lawrence did.
Bob Lawrence. He hired a planner named Don Seibold, and he and I became friends. Matter of fact, his family designed, his group designed this house. And everything about it. But the things that were amazing were all underground utilities, tree cutting restrictions.
And this was back in 1960.
1960. And tree cutting restrictions. The water and sewage stuff was all done. You could put a cabin on it and a home. In other words, you could set your cabin up to live in while you're doing it. Then when you retire, you come up and build your home too. Those were all things that nobody even heard of in San Juan County. And all lots were at least half an acre, 100 by 200. A lot of them weren't, but were bigger than that. But this was an enormous thing. We had city water. We didn't start out with city water, but we had a contractor that salted up our wells, so we had to go get city water. And we have power over there. Well, anyhow, it so happened the county commissioner's brother ran the power company. Lynn Nash was his name. And when he went to put the underground power in, it wasn't near big enough because Lynn knew nobody was ever going to live on Brown Island. It was old country thinking, you know. Anyhow, that so happened the power company on their own had to go back and put all new wire in. And we had, a phone service and all that stuff. And it was a marvelous experience because they had their own company boat, bring people back and forth. They had their own swimming pool, their own caretaker. They had a parking lot for overnight parking out away from town. Then they also had a float right down in town for we call the skiff float. They all had little Boston whalers in those days. And that's how they got back and forth to town, which was only a quarter of a mile away from Brown Island. Anyhow.
And what are your favorite places on Brown Island, back then and today?
Well, the favorite places primarily, had a friend named Mark Taylor who bought one of the lots that and he's been a family friend for years. He bought one of my favorite lots, which looked northwest, right into Friday Harbor and the ferry dock. And the other one was a guy named, another one, all fraternity brothers, Dick Philbrick, who bought the point overlooking my brother's place. And those were two of my favorite places. But I really loved the island because there were no cars. We had our own fire department. We had our own fire engine, as a matter of fact. That was the caretaker's buggy and that were the only, everything else was all electric cars on the island. Mm-hmm. It was a wonderful experience that I've enjoyed all my life. Mm-hmm. And it's the prime reason I'm in the real estate business, to be very frank with you.
Now, you were telling me about your two favorite places and your two fraternity brothers that had those places on Brown Island. Were they the original?
They were also investors.
Okay.
All of the investors in San Juan Associates were Fijis, except two. One was a Fidel named Hunter Simpson, and the other was a guy named Sam Savage, who was an SAE across the street from our house. And so they called it Fiji Island for a while. Anyhow, Friday Island was, if the island had been Green Island, we'd have called it Green Island, but since it wasn't a brown island, it was a green island, we named it the Friday Island. Mm-hmm. It was in Friday Harbor location.
Mm-hmm. And besides your fraternity brothers, where did you find the other new owners for the property? How did you sell the property?
Well, we sold the property primarily by advertising in Bellevue and Mercer Island. Mercer Island people were down there, all boat people, and it was the people that he designed the island for were the people that bought it and the people that still own it. They were the same. They have their own little family over there. They have their own squabbles, but they're very, very much Friday Islanders. And they're still very successful and still occupied. And it was just one of those things you design that worked out to be a home, away from home, for a lot of people.